At 27 years old, Trent Alexander-Arnold should be entering the unquestioned prime of his career. A Champions League winner, a Premier League champion, a symbol of Liverpool's modern era. On paper, everything looks complete, too complete. And that is precisely where the unease begins. Because behind the medals and the hometown pride, there is a growing silence around his name. A silence filled with doubt, criticism, and questions that were once unthinkable. Insiders whisper that the pressure of being the chosen one never truly left him. Every defensive lapse dissected, every tactical change treated as a personal failure. Every England omission felt like a public verdict. Why did admiration slowly turn into scrutiny? Why did trust feel so fragile, even at his peak? And which moments quietly reshaped how he sees himself? And with that, we come to the list. 5 moments, 5 turning points, 5 voices that were buried. Let us begin with number 5. Number 5, the England doubt. Long before the headlines turned hostile, the first voice that quietly shook Trent came from a place that was supposed to crown him. England. For years, he was hailed as a generational talent at club level, yet with the national team, his status never felt secure. Selection after selection, insiders noticed the same pattern. Trust came with conditions. Freedom came with hesitation. Under Gareth Southgate, Trent was rarely treated as what he truly was at Liverpool, a system-defining player. Instead, he was repositioned, restricted, or left out entirely. Midfield experiments, bench roles, tactical compromises that felt less like opportunities and more like tests he was expected to fail. Those close to the England camp recall moments where his confidence visibly dipped, not from poor performances, but from uncertainty about what was expected of him. Witnesses described training sessions where Trent looked hesitant, second-guessing instinctive passes that once came naturally. One former staff member later admitted that the message was never clear. Was he there to express himself, or merely to survive without making mistakes? That ambiguity followed him into matches. Every misplaced cross became evidence. Every defensive lapse amplified into a narrative. The turning point came when tournament squads were announced and his name sparked debate rather than certainty. Pundits questioned his defending. Fans divided into camps, and suddenly a player trusted with the creative heartbeat of Liverpool was portrayed as a liability on the international stage. Insiders say this contradiction hit him hard. How could excellence be unquestionable on one level and doubted on another? The consequences were subtle but lasting. Trent began to carry caution into spaces where he once played with instinct. His body language changed. Less risk, fewer daring moments. Not because he lacked ability, but because he felt watched, judged, measured by standards that shifted without warning. This was not a public scandal. There were no confrontations, no explosive interviews, just silence. And sometimes silence cuts deeper than criticism. Because when belief is withheld without explanation, it leaves a player alone with his doubts. And this was only the beginning. Number 4, when the system turned against him. At Liverpool, Trent Alexander-Arnold was never just a right-back. He was the outlet, the trigger, the mind that unlocked games. But when the system around him began to crack, the first finger pointed was often his. Insiders say this was the moment when trust quietly shifted into expectation, and expectation into blame. As Liverpool's midfield aged and intensity dropped, defensive gaps widened on Trent's side. Yet rather than being seen as a structural issue, it became personal. Opposition managers targeted his channel relentlessly. Every overload felt deliberate. Every conceded goal replayed with the same freeze frame. Trent caught high. Trent too narrow. Trent too slow to recover. What the camera rarely showed was what came before. The missed press, the lost duel in midfield, the broken shape. Witnesses inside the club recall private meetings where tactical responsibilities grew heavier. He was asked to create, control, and cover simultaneously, a burden few players could carry without cracks forming. One analyst later admitted that the system demanded perfection from him while forgiving chaos elsewhere. When results dipped, the narrative hardened, from innovator to weak link, from weapon to risk. The emotional toll was real. Insiders noticed Trent becoming quieter in the dressing room, less expressive on the pitch. He began choosing safer passes in moments that once defined his brilliance, not because he lost vision, but because mistakes now felt unforgivable. Each error reinforced a story that had already been written. The most damaging part was not the criticism itself, but its origin. It came from within, from pundits who once praised him, from fans who expected miracles without margin for error. Being a local boy made it worse. At Anfield, love can turn sharper than anywhere else. This was no collapse. It was erosion, slow, relentless, invisible to those only watching highlights, and by the time questions about his future began to surface, the damage had already settled deep. And still, the heavier shadows were yet to come. Number 3. The weight of the armband that never came. For years, many inside Liverpool believed it was only a matter of time before Trent Alexander-Arnold would inherit more than just responsibility. He was seen as the future voice of the dressing room, the local boy, the embodiment of the club's identity. Yet when leadership moments arrived, something quietly shifted. Under Jurgen Klopp, leadership at Liverpool was built on hierarchy and trust forged through years of emotional battles. Veterans spoke, others followed. Trent, despite his influence on the pitch, often found himself in between. Too important to ignore, too young, some said, to command. Insiders recall moments when tactical instructions were relayed through others, even when the game clearly revolved around him. This subtle distance mattered. Witnesses describe matches where Trent looked for reassurance that never came. Gestures unanswered, instructions delayed. When momentum turned, he was expected to respond like a leader without ever being fully crowned as one. That contradiction created tension. How do you lead when authority is implied but never confirmed? Behind closed doors, sources say this uncertainty gnawed at him. He carried responsibility without ownership, accountability without protection. When mistakes happened, he was judged like a senior figure. When leadership decisions were made, he was treated like a pupil. That imbalance slowly reshaped his confidence. The turning point, according to insiders, came during periods of poor form when changes were discussed. Tactical tweaks, role adjustments, even whispers of redefining his position permanently. Each conversation reinforced the same feeling. He was vital, but never untouchable, trusted, but never fully backed. For a player whose identity was built on belief and rhythm, that ambiguity was destabilizing. He stopped demanding the ball in tense moments. He chose caution over command. Not out of fear, but out of confusion about where he truly stood. This was not about ego, it was about clarity. And without it, even the most gifted players begin to doubt their voice. The stage was set, pressure mounted, and soon the criticism would no longer come in whispers. Number 2, when the outside noise became personal. By the time Trent Alexander-Arnold reached his mid-20s, criticism was no longer just tactical. It became emotional, personal, relentless. What once sounded like analysis slowly transformed into accusation. Pundits questioned his mentality. Former players dissected his defending with almost forensic obsession. Social media turned every clip into a verdict. Insiders say this was the phase that affected him most. Not because criticism was new, but because it followed him everywhere. A misplaced pass became proof of decline. A moment of hesitation became evidence of fear. Even his loyalty to Liverpool, once celebrated, was twisted into limitation. He needs to leave to grow, some said. He's too comfortable, others claimed. The narrative shifted from what he did wrong to who he supposedly was. Witnesses close to the player recall nights where he avoided interviews, training sessions where he arrived early and left quietly. The joy that once defined his game was replaced by control, precision without freedom, risk without reward. He was still performing, but differently, as if playing under a microscope. The most damaging moment came when debates about his position dominated England coverage. right back, midfielder, liability, luxury. Labels stacked on top of each other until the player himself seemed lost beneath them. Insiders admit that hearing respected voices question his fundamentals cut deeper than any fan reaction ever could. This constant scrutiny created isolation. The louder the opinions became, the quieter Trent grew. Not in effort, not in commitment, but in expression. He stopped explaining himself, stopped correcting narratives. Silence became his shield, but silence, when prolonged, turns inward, and when it does, pressure stops being external. It becomes internal, self-directed, unforgiving. And that was when the story reached its breaking point. Number 1, the moment he realized he was alone. There comes a moment in every career when a player understands a brutal truth. Talent protects you only until it doesn't. For Trent, insiders say that moment arrived not in a stadium, but in the quiet aftermath of criticism he could no longer escape. Not from rivals, not from opposition fans, but from voices that once defended him. According to people close to the dressing room, this was when he understood that perception had overtaken reality. Performances were no longer judged in context. They were judged in isolation. One action, one clip, one narrative repeated until it felt like fact. Even strong games ended with the same question. But can he defend? The answer no longer mattered. The label had stuck. Witnesses describe a subtle but decisive shift. Trent stopped reacting, stopped fighting back. He accepted that approval was temporary and loyalty conditional. The local hero realized that being one of their own offered no shelter when results turned. In that realization, something hardened. Not bitterness, distance. Insiders say this was when his mindset changed permanently. He began playing with calculation rather than instinct, choosing moments carefully, protecting himself emotionally as much as tactically. Not because he cared less, but because caring too much had become costly. This was the deepest shadow. Not doubt about ability, but clarity about isolation. The understanding that even at your peak, you stand alone with your choices, your mistakes, your silence. And from that moment on, everything that followed felt different. The twist in Trent Alexander-Arnold's story is not a transfer request, a dressing room clash, or a dramatic fallout. It is something far quieter and far more unsettling. Insiders reveal that during the height of the criticism, Trent never once demanded public defense. No statements, no interviews to set the record straight. Not because he agreed with the narrative, but because he no longer believed it would change anything. One staff member recalled him saying privately that explanations only fed the noise. Silence, he felt, was the only remaining control. But here is the shock. Behind closed doors, those closest to him knew he was evolving, not breaking. He began studying the game differently, reading spaces earlier, managing risk with intention. What looked like hesitation to the outside was, in reality, adaptation, survival at the elite level. The twist is this. The moment many thought he was losing confidence was the moment he stopped playing to be loved. He was no longer chasing approval. He was redefining longevity. The crowd never noticed because growth does not always look spectacular. Sometimes it looks restrained. And that restraint changed everything. Today, Trent Alexander-Arnold stands as a different figure from the fearless teenager who once crossed without hesitation. Not diminished, refined. The scars are still there, but they no longer define him. They guide him. The years of doubt reshaped his relationship with football itself. He learned that brilliance alone is never enough, that loyalty does not guarantee protection, that silence can be both armor and burden. And yet, he remained. Not because it was easy, but because walking away would have meant letting the noise win. Insiders say he now measures success differently. Less by applause, more by control. By influence that does not always appear in highlights. By leadership expressed through calm rather than command. The world may still debate his position, his defending, his legacy. But inside, the battle that mattered most has already been fought. This story leaves us with an uncomfortable truth. In modern football, the loudest voices are rarely the ones carrying the greatest weight. Sometimes the most important battles happen where no camera is pointed. It shows us that glory often casts longer shadows than anyone is prepared to face.